Good morning, good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us for this virtual side event of the High Level Political Forum on the importance of SME financing to COVID-19 response and recovery efforts. We're very glad you were able to join us. We'll begin our session today with opening remarks by Manuel, Director General for Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Action from the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you, and welcome to everyone to this virtual side event. We have only 1 hour and we have 3 objectives, so I will and I have been asked, and I would like to ask also everyone else to be quite brief and to the point in their allocations. The 3 objectives: we want to highlight the importance of SMEs in emerging markets to cushion COVID-19 impacts, especially on women, healthcare, food security, and the delivery of essential goods and services. Secondly, we want to underscore the importance of SME financing in achieving the Agenda 2030. And thirdly, and maybe most importantly, we want to showcase the SDG 500 impact investment opportunity that will be presented today. Some of us here were present when we launched the SDG 500 in Davos at the World Economic Forum in January. And nobody, and I mean really nobody, would have imagined how much the world has changed since then. I myself have done 1 ministerial visit to Cabo Verde in February, where we discussed our program over there, and then there has been no international travel. And I think it's the same for almost all of us. Our meetings have been replaced by virtual meetings. They are not the same, but they have proven surprisingly efficient, I have to say. And I would like to thank all the participants today. I think we are more than 112. And I would also like to thank the co-sponsors, UNCDF and ITC. We have not yet grasped the entire immediate health impact and the economic aftershocks in developing countries. But what we can know already, some World Bank estimates show that 100 million people could be pushed back below the poverty line. And we have a food and nutrition crisis looming, notably in the Sahel region and in other parts of the world. What started as a health crisis has become a threat to global prosperity, reversing years of development work and gains in human security. The deep economic recession entails unprecedented pressure on domestic budgets, while needs are increasing. And while the virus affected, in the first time in our countries at least, mainly the old and vulnerable people, the economic downturn of COVID-19 will have devastating consequences for young people, particularly with regard to job opportunities. And we know that 70% of the workforce in emerging markets works into micro and SMEs or are self-employed. And we also know that the private sector and not ODA will generate the desperately needed jobs in developing countries. So we have to find new ways of sustaining and extending actually international flows for sustainable development, and we need to invest in SMEs. We are all under budget constraints, and we have to ensure short-term response and prevention, of course. But we also have to ensure longer-term finance for recovery. We have to build back better, fairer, and greener. ODA, as I said, is under pressure, and we have to protect it. But we also need to stimulate more diverse financial mechanisms for sustainable development. So to conclude, I would like to say that innovative financing for SMEs is not an option, but a conditio sine qua non if we want to tackle COVID-19 response and recovery, and if we want to achieve the SDGs. It was true back then in January when we launched the SDG 500, and it is even more so today. So we can only achieve this together. We have to join efforts, governments, international financial institutions, private sector, UN agencies, and civil society. That's why we gathered here today, and I really welcome the diversity of participants And with this short introduction, I would like to hand over to you, Esther, to proceed with our side event. And I wish ourselves very fruitful discussions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Manuel. Good morning, good afternoon again, everyone. I'm Esther Pan-Sloan, the Head of Partnerships, Policy and Communications at UNCDF, and I'll be moderating today's session. We're very pleased to have a distinguished collection of speakers today. Judith Carl, the Executive Secretary of UNCDF, the United Nations Capital Development Fund. Dorothy Tembo, the Acting Executive Director of the International Trade Center. Michelle Nunn, the CEO of CARE USA. Dr. Luchika Ditu, Executive Director of the Stop TB Partnership, Lysine Akane, the CEO of Smart Africa, Jean-Philippe de Ravel, Founder and Managing Partner of Bamboo Capital Partners, and Naveed Hanif, Director of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. We'll begin with Judith Carl of UNCDF.
Thank you so much, Esther. Thank you to all the participants who are joining us today. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be at this event with all of our partners in the SDG 500 initiative to speak about how we're working together to support financing for small and medium enterprises. We did, as Mr. Tonar said, we did launch this in Davos before the COVID-19 crisis hit, because it was a recognition that actually we needed new pathways for finance to reach SMEs, particularly in the least developed countries, because the development finance architecture was not adequately reaching the missing middle. And the questions that we've been asking ourselves since the COVID-19 crisis is, with all the stimulus packages and all the work that we've done, have we actually created new pathways? Are we now meeting the needs of the missing middle? Or are those gaps in the international finance architecture still as apparent as ever? And our belief is that SDG 500 is as relevant now as it was before, but probably even more urgent than it was when we launched it in Davos. The UN Capital Development Fund makes public and private finance work for the poor in the world's 47 least developed countries. Our focus is particularly on the last mile, where resources for development are scarcest and where market failures are the most pronounced. In the LDCs, the last mile often means rural, poor, and underserved populations. It can also mean secondary cities, municipalities, and localities where finance does not tend to flow equally. The last mile also refers to small and medium-sized businesses that face challenges in accessing finance because they are too big for the microfinance institutions and too small for the commercial banks and the development finance institutions. These SMEs now face unprecedented challenges caused by COVID-19, with the majority of LDC-based SMEs reporting moderate to severe liquidity constraints. We see that women-led and youth-led small businesses are the worst affected because they tend to be in the most exposed sectors and tend to have the fewest options to receive support, including financing. We know that the impacts of COVID-19 on small businesses risk leading to devastating effects on employment and livelihoods. Even before the pandemic, Africa, for example, needed to create up to 15 million jobs per year to keep up with its growing population. Most of these jobs need to come from the micro, small, and medium enterprise sector. This is why financing to help SMEs survive is such an urgent issue to address. Without it, poverty rates will go up, and this will have a negative knock-on effect on most of the other SDGs. We know that many governments are offering stimulus packages and other support measures aimed at supporting SMEs through the crisis. In a roundtable discussion that we organized last week on financing for LDC-based SMEs, our panelists from Asia and Africa consistently mentioned that SME crisis funds, which mostly are channeled through the formal banking system, are not reaching those small enterprises that need them the most. Instead, the view of the expert panel was that more flexible vehicles, such as debt funds, that also include complementary technical assistance, would be able to reach and support small enterprises more quickly and effectively. UNCDF issues loans and guarantees on our own balance sheet, and we focus on providing catalytic de-risking capital combined with technical assistance to early stage growth companies. In our own lending portfolio, we have restructured about half of the loans we have outstanding to small businesses because of the COVID-19 crisis. In addition to helping SMEs survive the immediate impacts of the crisis, SME financing is also critical for the longer-term recovery to build more resilient, inclusive economies that can accelerate SDG achievement. Already in pre-COVID times, there was a significant financing gap for SMEs, hindering efforts to build inclusive economies. Some 40% of formal MSMEs in developing countries reported having unmet financing needs, totaling more than 5 trillion per year. Despite efforts by donors and development finance institutions, this finance gap is still not being filled at scale. This is where SDG 500 and the Build Fund comes in as a pragmatic answer to the calls for increased public-private partnerships and mobilization of private capital for SDG achievement. Build is a blended finance fund that aims to help fill the SME financing gap and provide investment capital for SDG positive SMEs in LDCs. UNCDF will serve as the investment advisor to the fund and will identify, screen, and provide technical assistance to potential investees. In the area of COVID-19, we're confident that this fund and the wider SDG 500 initiative with Bamboo play an important role in demonstrating how SME financing can be delivered, both to respond to the current crisis and to help accelerate SDG achievement in the coming decade. We're very proud to be part of this SDG 500 initiative and very much look forward to the discussion. Back to you, Esther.
Thank you so much. Now we'll turn to Ms. Dorothy Tembo of the ITC.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, whichever part of the world you're in. And thank you very much to the government of Luxembourg and the UNCDF for partnering with us on this event. It is indeed a pleasure, and I think a lot of what I would have said, Judith has already put across, so I would just try to, maybe by way of trying to emphasize some of the points, but also perhaps to that add a few additional points. I think it's very clear to all of us that these are indeed trying times that have created a lot of uncertainty for businesses, particularly the micro, small, and medium enterprises. It's changed the way we produce, consume, and indeed it's changed the way we trade. And this is a change that is going to be with us many months going forward and years going forward, probably. We still don't know the magnitude of what we are dealing with because it keeps evolving. But even where we stand, I think it's very clear to us in terms of where we are with respect to the impact that it's presently having on the businesses. And therefore, I do agree that, you know, we are in a situation that demands that we have an innovative approach in terms of the responses and solutions we're providing to the countries that we are working with, particularly those in developing countries. What is it that ITC has established up to this point? We carried out a survey across 110 countries, which was done obviously through our different networks, but also we've done this through our different programs, ones relating to women and youth, in particular the She Trades initiative. And what we have established from that is really confirming precisely what has been said before I took the floor, but it also reconfirms much of the fears that we had when this pandemic kicked in, which is that we have a very negative impact in as far as micro, small, and medium enterprises are concerned. 60% of those that responded to our survey are saying they have been strongly affected. And of those 60%, for Africa in particular, it's much higher. 75% are saying we are in a very difficult situation by the very nature that they are small, as has been said before, and indeed they are ones that have limitations in terms of capital that would be at their disposal to try and build themselves. the point I would want to make here is the fact that we are dealing with a situation that has already been bad up to this point, even though I must admit that we have had some good progress made in certain respects. And this is not only in relation to trade, but across the different pillars, including on the social side of things. Since if one has to look to go as far back as Beijing, it's very clear that there have been some positive steps, but all that is now being threatened by the pandemic. It is going to neutralize all the good steps that had been taken, and we must ensure that we try and secure this situation. We need to ensure that we are not only working with the businesses to become resilient, but that we are also repositioning them in the context of the recovery. What we have seen from the analysis that we have done is that 25% of these companies are saying within 3 to 6 months, they might actually go under. It is a very wanting situation that demands that we simply ensure that we are finding ways and means of trying to support these entities. I think at the core of this is what we really do as part of the recovery process. How do we support the building back better efforts that are being made, particularly with respect to empowerment of women? And a key part of this really lies in ensuring that we are able to mobilize the resources, but not only are we able to mobilize the resources, but we need to ensure that women can actually have access to those resources and be able to sustain themselves. And this is what has been driving us. As Judith rightly pointed out, we started off in Davos, having recognized this need, having the need of ensuring that we are not only taking an innovative approach, but one that is practical, one that offers a partnership that enables businesses to be able to tap from the different resource ports that would be available in this context, so that we are able to give the women that opportunity to be able to grow their businesses and be able to do something more concrete on the ground. So going to Davos, we were very clear about that aspect, and we felt this was a must do for us, and we would bring the expertise that we have, which is one that is relating to the 20,000 She Trades members that we have. We believe that leveraging on this network and the women entrepreneurs in terms of ensuring that we have a good pipeline, a pipeline where you have investment-ready women could be an aspect that we explored. And I'm very, very pleased that CARE Enterprises and Bamboo Capital partners were very keen to go with us in this direction. And a big thank you to you. Our ambition in all this is to make sure that we are pushing the boundaries of gender lenses, investing to measure on how business policies and practices of the fund's portfolio companies improve the full participation and economic conditions of women workers, consumers, supply chain business owners. And we are certainly wanting to go beyond this. I think this is one aspect, but we continue to do all the other work that we have been doing, particularly in the context of COVID, which is adapting our delivery modalities to be able to respond to the needs that are there on the country. But all this will come to zero if we really do not tackle the financing side of things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tembo. Now we'll turn to Michelle Nunn, the CEO of CARE USA.
Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be with you all, and a special thanks to the government of Luxembourg and UNCDF and ITC and Bamboo. We're thrilled to have as partners, and Dorothy well articulated, I think, the power of our partnership with CARE She Trades. CARE is, just as a refresher, one of the world's largest international NGOs, and we're, along with the UN, celebrating our 75th year. And we're focused on eradicating poverty and empowering women and girls around the world. And along with all of you, I think we have been mobilizing in new and different ways in the last months to respond to COVID, its social, its economic, its health implications. And we're particularly focused on the impact on women, who we know have been and always are in times of crisis because of inequality, hardest hit. We've responded in 67 countries with water, sanitation, hygiene, sexual and reproductive health, protection against gender-based violence. We've reached over 11 million people directly, but I think we all recognize that whatever it is that we're doing, we need to continue to challenge ourselves with new innovation, and that the unprecedented nature of this crisis just calls upon us to do things in new ways. And I think that this work that we're doing here together and sharing today, this morning, is very much a part of that. So we're really proud to be working on the Care She Trades Impact Fund with Bamboo and ITC, and to really, as has been alluded to by Dorothy and by Judith, to help unlock critical capital in the areas that need it most, especially during these extraordinary economic times. We all know that these economic shocks really threaten the progress that we've made in improving lives for poor populations, and they really jeopardize our achievement of the SDGs. So we need different, more impactful, new kinds of creative partnerships. And one of the ways that CARE is embracing this is through the $75 million CARE She Trades Impact Fund, which has been designed to meet the needs of those who are feeling, again, the disproportionate impacts of this global pandemic, which are women. So I just want to highlight maybe 3 dimensions of the fund that I think make it particularly powerful and impactful as part of this SDG 500. The first is that we're targeting 6 countries in South and Southeast Asia. And we know that these countries, there's rapid economic growth, strong business potential, and good political stability, and yet there are tens of millions of people who are still living in poverty and below the poverty line. We also know that it's an area that is vastly underserved in terms of its capital allocations by investors, with only 3 to 6% of total capital, global capital, going in here in 2019. The second dimension of our work that I think is unique is this dynamic and robust gender lens in our investment strategy. We're not just investing in women-led, women-owned businesses. We're taking a much more holistic approach, and we're applying a gender analysis across every stage of our investment cycle to help us make better investment decisions. So we'll invest in growth stage companies across sectors that are committed to increasing the economic opportunity for women employees, for consumers, and supply chain business owners. And we know from CARE's decades of experience that there is a direct correlation to addressing gender inequalities, but also creating economic value for companies. So the third and final, I think, dimension that is unique here is that we're really creating, I think, an unprecedented kind of partnership, unique and broad presence on the ground through CARE alone, for instance, where we have 10,000 employees in 100 countries. And we will be reaching into our technical assistance, to our know-how for 75 years worth of work around how to build gender smart solutions that really work for the fund's investee businesses. So to just conclude, I think we are really energized about the CARE She Trade Impacts Funds. We believe that we're creating something quite new and powerful, a network of profitable businesses that are committed to inclusive and gender just business practices and lifting up families out of poverty. So we are imagining a world where businesses led and owned by women, and with inclusive policies and practices, scale, and building new models that show us the way to achieve financial success and economic success for women and their families. So our fund will reach, we believe, hundreds of thousands of people to address poverty and rebuild better as a new normal in South and Southeast Asia. So we hope that many of you all will join us as partners and investors to make this vision possible. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Now we'll turn to Dr. Dita of the Stop TB Partnership.
So thank you very much, Esther, and I want to thank to the government of Luxembourg and UNCDF and ITC for hosting this important event. And I think, like all of us, who would have think when we met in Davos where we will be right now, and who would have think that for several of us that probably was one of the last trips that we did, probably for even 2020 at least for some missions. So it's I don't know, when I see some of you that we met over there and we discussed. It shows how fragile in a way the world is, and how fragile what we construct. Sometimes just assuming that we know shows that we actually don't know too much, and we should not work always on all the assumptions in constructing things, but we should be fresh and risk takers. So at that time, I don't know, if you recall, I'm a medical doctor. I'm the executive director of the Stop TB Partnership, a UN organization hosted, and we are trying to end TB by 2030. At that time, I was emphasizing the fact that TB is the biggest infectious disease killer in the world. Unfortunately, it remains the biggest infectious disease killer in the world. TB kills 4,000 people a day. Is not a competition who kills more, but is very sad where we are in the world with respiratory diseases, with airborne diseases like COVID and TB killing so much every single day. You very nice, I want to appreciate very much this gathering, as we have ladies starting all this conversation and you, Esther, facilitating. So it's always amazing to have that. No offense to our colleagues, the gentlemen. But I want to say that everyone before me emphasized the fact that, you know, we are so impacted about COVID. And all this is the COVID itself, but also all these mitigating measures that were being taken. And there is a big toll, economical and societal, that is being taken because of this COVID. For TB alone, we commissioned a study, and we looked over what will be the impact. And because we did this late in April, we didn't even realize that actually all the lockdown and all the recovery will last long. But even with the data we had at that time, we know that there will be an additional 1.4 million people that will die over the next 5 years because of this entire COVID pandemic mitigation measures. It's not because of the COVID virus itself. But you know, as the world will continue to respond to this COVID-19, and you know, I don't think we are yet, we are out of the woods, and I don't know how soon we'll be out of the woods with this COVID. The way we provide care needs to be transformed. And of course, it needs to be accessible, integrated, effective, and resilient when we deal with this kind of pandemics. And in TB, we have long advocated for bringing innovative solutions. We from Stop TB, because our tools, our main tool used to be for a long time, and still remains in a lot of places, the microscope used for diagnosis. And the microscope, you know, is a tool that has more than 100 years of existence. So that's why, since our inception, but even more recently, we are supporting a lot of rollout of innovative solutions through different initiatives that we have in Stop TB Partnership, TB Reach, a platform to evaluate new TB ideas and innovations, our global drug facility, which is a global sourcing and procurement mechanism for TB drugs and diagnostics, as well as the Accelerator for Impact, which supports SMEs developing digital health solutions and supports them to rapidly scale up these solutions to TB affected countries, communities, and people. And I am, as I was then, I continue to remain optimistic and very excited by our collaboration with the Bamboo Capital Partners and the partnership between the Hill Fund and our A4I team to provide support for these SMEs, especially the ones coming from the low and middle income countries and emerging markets, because we were pushing already for this. We were pushing a lot in our health and in our TB space, which is kind of not very large. We were pushing a lot and supporting the rollout of health tech solutions, artificial intelligence for chest x-rays, digital adherence technologies, M-health applications, among others, that have a huge potential among diseases. You know, we advocated, like, you know, we need to find people with COVID, we need to find people with TB. We pushed vans that are equipped with all different tools. You have a mobile x-ray, you have an artificial intelligence tool, so you can very easy, you don't need to have people coming. You can go closer to the people, and you can for sure do much more than with the normal tools. We also, working like that, we observed that all these innovations are often developed by SMEs, being unconstrained by larger institutional structures. And we see these entrepreneurs at the forefront of developing rapid solutions, very smart one that will help ensure that people, especially the most marginalized one, have access to proper care, quality assured, people-centered. But as I started saying, I think we need to really think of constructing not on the old assumptions that we all had, but on some of the new assumptions. And we think and we believe that the Hill Fund and A4I partnerships is pushing the boundaries on how the public and private sector are working together. You know, we speak a lot about working together, but what's happening, there are projects left and right. I think we need to be much more bold, much more transformational, and I think we need to take risks, share the risks, but also share the rewards when they come. And there is an opportunity before us to address a market failure in supporting promising digital health solution that can transform health systems and the way that we provide care. I don't know if it's just COVID or the situation we are now in, which we found ourselves globally, but I think it's imperative that we have new partnerships, that we put them in place. And that's not only needed to get us out of COVID. I think it's needed for us going forward, because I don't think we were, but I hope we will be prepared to face any things that are coming new in front of us. So I'm really pleased to be here, and we are very keen to play the ball, as we say, as much as we can. And we are keen to be as much as out of the box and bold as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker will be Lysine Akane, the CEO and founder of the Smart Africa Initiative.
Mute myself. Can you all hear me? Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. UN organization, delegate, private sector partners, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, or good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you are around the world. On behalf of Smart Africa Alliance, it's my great pleasure to participate in this session to discuss the importance of SME financing to COVID-19 response. Let me start by congratulating you all for rallying across a common purpose of seizing the moment this challenge has addressed to all, to prove that we in Africa are ready to use our own resources to grow stronger and more resilient, and work together towards the achievement of the 17th Sustainable Development Goal. A few months back, Smart Africa pledged to participate in the SDG 500. As a matter of fact, our assessment of these needs, of the needs of the African startup and ICT ecosystem, showed the lack of risk capital to support startups in the early stage of the business development, pre-seed, seeds, early growth, the lack of investors, who in turn lacked awareness and knowledge about venture capital, the lack of experienced professional to work in the venture capital sector in Africa, and lack of appropriate regulatory setting for venture capital funds and funds managers. As a response to COVID-19 pandemic, the Smart Africa Secretariat launched a few months back a call for project targeting at African startup for a technology platform to support our member state in identifying, tracking, and containing the COVID-19 patients, with an adaptability to suit the different technological and socio-cultural diversity across the continent, as the continent is really huge. Out of 307 respondents, 72% were from African country, 46% were ICT SMEs, and 29% were startup. With this call, we have witnessed how African startup and ICT ecosystem have mobilized and expressed unprecedented resilience and creativity throughout the COVID virus pandemic outbreak and the subsequent crisis. We are continuing our work to mobilize state in response and allow for a creation of the best possible condition for them to thrive. We understand that it is time to involve African country in building up the best possible funding vehicle to their startup and ICT ecosystem in line with Sustainable Development Goal. We have been witnessing the positive progress of Tunisia's Smart Capital and Funds on Funds, part of the Startup Tunisia within Africa, within Smart Africa Alliance. Smart Capital Funds of Funds, with its target size of 200 million euro over 20 years, with initial closing expected at 100 million euro, aims at to invest in 13 plus investment funds dedicated to startup at each stage of their development, like seed stage, early stage, late stage. Has managed to build a strong vehicle that served the startup nation's ambitions of Tunisia. Other successful examples within the alliance have proved there is a momentum of to seize the World Bank backed Invest funds in Morocco of 50 million USD and the 200 million US dollars Egypt entrepreneurship funds, just to cite just a few. Smart Africa is committed to act as a catalyzer for the social economic development of Africa alongside your institution all by supporting the digital transformation of the continent. We will continue to encourage our members to invest in seed funds and venture capital funds, co-invest in startup and strengthen angel network to support the growth of African startup. I wish you a fruitful discussion and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. So now for the participants in this webinar, you've heard from the technical experts, the UN agencies, and the international NGOs that are partners of the SDG 500. Now we'll turn to the governments who have put in critical funding into the initiative. And the first speaker will be Manuel from Luxembourg.
Thank you. I thought there was Jean-Philippe Descrevel beforehand. Has that changed?
Yes, of course. Now, of course, the most critical partner here, the Jean-Philippe Descrevel, founder of Bamboo Capital Partners, who is the linchpin of this entire initiative. JP, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Esther. Can you hear me okay? Okay, very good. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the government of Luxembourg, UNCDF and ITC for co-sponsoring and sponsoring this event today. And thank you all for taking the time to be speakers and to join us. Actually, I'm very happy to talk about SDG 500 today because I really believe that it's going to be a game changer in the SDG related investing industry. As you all know, SDG 500 is an innovative $500 million investment platform. And to my knowledge, it's the first ever asset-backed securitization for such type of combined SDG-related assets in emerging markets. Its theory of change is mapped towards 14 of the 17 SDGs. And it brings, as you have seen, together the strength of 4 UN agencies, 1 international NGO, an alliance of 30 African states, and an experienced commercial asset manager. It combines 6 impact funds with different asset classes. SDG 500 is actually about financing of early stage companies in the so-called missing middle over the long term. The platform has a 12-year life. Its portfolio is completely diversified across hundreds of SMEs, active in emerging and frontier markets with a focus on Africa and the least developed countries. Multiple sectors are covered, such as access to finance, healthcare, clean energy, education, with a special focus on gender justice and an emphasis on technology-enabled business models that facilitate the delivery of essential goods and services, including during disruptions, and drive down prices for low-income populations because every dollar counts. SDG 500 follows a blended finance approach and has been specifically designed to unlock new sources of funding at scale from institutional investors. $140 million of first loss will catalyze $370 million of private sector investments. We are now in advanced conversations with multiple private sector investors, including several GISD members, who have expressed interest to invest as soon as the first loss is filled. They will be able to choose from 3 different tranches with varying degrees of seniority and market-based returns so that each of them can find a suitable investment opportunity matching their risk-return appetite within the structure. And I should say the notes that we are going to issue enjoy an especially high level of protection against any default. So as you have seen, the EU, as well as African and European states, have already committed to the first loss tranche. Again, I believe this is a historic first. SDG 500 offers donor governments the opportunity to invest alongside African governments who are committing their own budgetary resources to the first loss. And in a testament to impact thesis of SDG 500, NGOs such as CARE USA and AGRA have committed funds to the first loss as well, which in my opinion is an important signal for other NGOs and foundations and development finance institutions looking to be catalytic in their giving or investing strategies. Indeed, with SDG 500, each dollar that you will give or invest in the first loss is matched by $2.5 of private sector investors. And that's great leverage. SDG 500 is a replicable and scalable model in which we reconcile seemingly opposite objectives. On one end, the size of investment opportunity required for the mainstream private investors, and on the other, the real and measured impact through the financing of early stage SMEs with ticket sizes going down as low as $250,000. As you have all said, the COVID-19 crisis has only reinforced the fact that SMEs are a crucial element of any post-crisis recovery. And now is the time to act. So despite challenges of the past month, I'm happy to share that we have successfully raised $80 million in first loss commitments already. But to begin the deployment, we need today an additional $60 million in first loss investments. We feel the same sense of urgency as you all do. Entrepreneurs that the SDG 500 funds will invest in are the real engines of job and wealth creation in emerging markets. And what they desperately need is stage-appropriate growth capital. And as all of you speakers have made it clear today, SMEs are a critical pathway to ensuring that the recovery from the current crisis is actually built on the principles of gender equality, climate resilience, and more equitable health systems. So we are passionate about investing in entrepreneurs that enable poor people to live dignified and productive lives. I must say we are honored to be working with our UN partners and NGO partners to make that vision a reality. And now I invite you all, please, to join us on this impact journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, JP. And now we're ready to hear from the governments, and we'll turn over to Luxembourg. Over to you, Manuel.
Thank you very much, Esther. And yes, what can I say? Why did we join after the presentation of Jean-Pierre Descrevel? Why would you join an initiative where your public funds are multiplied by 2.5, where you work together with UN agencies, with private sector, where you have civil society, where you have a real impact on the ground, and where you can be sure that your money is not only well invested, but also has a social impact on the ground? I think the answer is that it has come almost naturally. You know that Luxembourg is very engaged in development cooperation. We provide 1% of our GNI to official development assistance. And we have been investing into microfinance and inclusive finance since more than 20 years. So as a financial center of excellence, our government always had a strong will to promote sustainable finance and impact investment. And over the years, we have gathered a presence here in Luxembourg of a multitude of institutions, actors, public and private networks, labeling agency, technical assistance providers, etc. So we have an enabling environment, if I may say so. One example is the Luxembourg Green Exchange that was on our stock exchange, the first platform dedicated exclusively to green bonds. And today, over 50% of all green bonds volumes are listed on the LGX. We have other initiatives of social impact funds that we launched, Luxembourg Microfinance Development Fund, the Forestry Fund. But I think the big breakthrough came also with the SDGs. It was at a conference of our fund industry, the ALFI, the Luxembourg Fund Industry Conference, annual conference, where all these different worlds, could I say, have come together. And I think the SDGs played a big role in this. People are more aware the needs on one side and the opportunities on the other side. As I said in the introduction, there are huge financial gaps that we can never cope with our official development assistance. There are trillions of dollars of investment that are needed. And on the other side, we have people who also care where their money goes. The investors, of course, they need to have an interest rate, but they also more and more want to see a social impact. So we didn't jump into SDG 500 at once. It came step by step. We started with the ABC Fund together with IFAD, the EU, AGRA, and Bamboo Capital, where we were the first movers to provide 5 million euros of first loss. The European Commission came in with 45 million, AGRA came in with 5 million, the Swiss government wants to come in or is coming in with 9 million Swiss francs. So you see that the impact is really growing, and that's only the first loss. And then of course comes the private capital. So you can really scale up your interventions. We joined the Build Fund with UNCDF, also with 2 million euro co-funding as first loss funding as first movers. And we also joined the Block Smart Africa initiative to boost the new technologies in Africa. So of the 6 funds, we are investing into 3. And yes, I can only say that it's for us, it's a very good investment. It's a leverage of our public funds. We have impact on the grounds, and we work through multi-stakeholder partnerships. So it's just the way to go for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And on behalf of the government of Cote d'Ivoire, we invite Lysine Akane to speak next.
Thank you very much for having me a second time. I'm really honored to represent the late Prime Minister, Minister of Budget and the Government Portfolio of Cote d'Ivoire, His Excellency Amadou Gon Coulibaly, who was supposed to be on this call at this moment, but due to a sudden tragedy occur on the 8th of July that led to his death, made me representing the Cote d'Ivoire speech or the message at this event. So it really made it impossible to honor, for him to honor this event in person. So therefore, I am greatly honored to deliver the message on behalf of Cote d'Ivoire. In Cote d'Ivoire, small and medium enterprises provide jobs and livelihood to the majority of the populations, as they do across Africa. Today's announcement of Cote d'Ivoire's 5 million euro commitments honors the legacy of the late Prime Minister Amadou Gon Coulibaly, my lifetime mentor, who deeply believed in African entrepreneurs and Africa businesses and worked tirelessly to propel our continents towards a knowledge-based economy in the 21st century. On behalf of the President Alassane Ouattara, who could not be with us also today, the government of Cote d'Ivoire is proud to announce its commitment to SDG 500 during the United Nations High-Level Political Forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have a very short time for questions, and we know that the government of Botswana had wanted to ask a question. So we would ask the representative of Botswana to please indicate in the chat if you are ready for the question, and we'll call on you. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next one. All right, while we are trying to line up our government speaker, I'd like to call on Irene Arias, the CEO of the IDB Lab at the InterAmerican Development Bank for a question. Irene, can you please unmute yourself? Okay, it looks like we're running into some technical difficulties. If participants do have questions, please write them in the chat and we'll try to get to them if we have time. So now we'll move on to our next speaker, the Director of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, Navid Hanif.
Thank you, Esther, and good morning, everyone. And thanks to the government of Luxembourg and ITC and UNCDF for bringing us together. The conversation has been very useful. And I want to mention two things before I introduce the GIST. Yes, COVID-19 is a challenge of momentous proportions, but you also see the world flooded with liquidity which wasn't there in February. And if that is aligned with the SDGs, we have an opportunity to find the financing that is needed. My second comment is I want to really convey my sincere appreciation to JP and all those who are participating in SDG 500 are coming up with an instrument which is unique, but which brings purpose and profit together in a very judicious way. I hope that others will follow and develop such products. The UN Secretary General, as all of you know, clearly acknowledges the role that the private sector has to play in financing the Sustainable Development Agenda. So he brought together 30 CEOs from all over the world last October. We call it the UN Global Investors for Sustainable Development Alliance, and UNCDF is a very active member of the Secretariat team supporting it. The CEOs dealing with $16 trillion. The Alliance is pursuing three things, and the thing which is most relevant to this conversation is about moving the money. They are first focused on expanding the sustainable investment envelope, because as of now, we do not have sufficient funding going into sustainable investment. It's a trend, but it's not a transformation that we have been asking for. It's still not mainstream. So those CEOs are committed to make this modality a mainstream activity for financing SDGs. Second, and JP is aware of that, is how do you move the money where it is needed? And that requires, of course, guarantees, blended finance. It requires bankable projects, a pipeline of bankable projects that can be funded by these companies. It also requires very clear understanding of risks and rewards and the impact. And that brings me to their third function, that they believe genuinely that you have to have great degree of agreement in the world. What is sustainable investing? Because as of now, we have 400 matrices to measure it and plethora of definitions. So they have come up with a definition which will help us to identify what sustainable investing means. How do you measure impact? What kind of indices are needed? And how do you get data? Data remains a big challenge. And for SDG 500, all of these areas of activity are crucial. First of all, getting the money where it is needed, and then showing the impact that money is making. So this alliance that the Secretariat has launched is committed to making a difference, particularly in changing the perception about risk. For instance, Africa is perceived as a high-risk area, but once you deal with it hands-on, that perception is not based on facts. And GIST Alliance members are committed to dispel these perceptions which are prevalent about high-risk investments by bringing together private sector and, of course, governments to make sure that the investment flows where it is needed. Esther, thank you for the time and the opportunity to join you.
Thank you so very much. We do see that there are a few questions, but unfortunately we won't have time to get to them today, but please do send your questions to us by the chat, and we will post answers to we'll post the question and the answer when we post the recording of this webinar. So for the final word to conclude our session today, we'll go back to Manuel of Luxembourg, our host.
Thank you, Esther. And I think we see the interest, and I think we could continue during at least 1 other hour to discuss and answer to the questions. And I would really like to thank all the speakers. It's a bit difficult to grasp it all, but I would say, starting but what Naveed just said, liquidity is there. we have a unique instrument. We need and we have bankable projects. And so we have, with all the partners that we have now heard today, $3 from ITC, there is a pipeline. They have a pipeline of projects. We have, with CARE, we have technical assistance and know-how for 75 years. So happy birthday also to CARE US. We have specific instruments for women entrepreneurs. As Lucisa said, we should be taking risks. Of course, these should be calculated risks. And for this, we have to roll out innovative solutions. We have to rely on new technology. We have to go into new partnerships. I'm really happy also to hear from Smart Africa and from Cote d'Ivoire, and I express my heartfelt condolences to the Cote d'Ivoire. But I'm really happy to see that, as Akane said, Africa is growing their own resources. They are investing themselves in a regulatory framework, in the resources, and in the digital transformation of Africa. So there is a whole new dimension here that has to be supported. And that is supported, actually that was the fact that African countries were investing in the Bloc Smart Africa made us also do this move and invest into this fund. Yeah, the fund has been presented. It's a diversified portfolio. We have an SDG impact. We have already gathered we have gathered 80 million first loss. And we need to mobilize the rest, and then we can really the fund can be, the SDG 500 can be fully operational. So I would like to thank everyone here. It's a pleasure working with you, and I'm quite certain we will succeed in mobilizing the rest and then have the impact that we want. Of course, one last thing, very important, how do we measure the impact? So measuring the impact is, of course, measuring the revenues will be quite easy, but measuring the impact is maybe the most difficult. So also there, we rely on technical assistance, on our partners with boots on the ground to make sure we have the impact that we need. So thanks a lot for everyone for participating.
We'll revisit.
Yeah, no, nothing case you say going forward.
Really appreciate your attendance, and the webinar will be posted on the websites of the relevant agencies. Thank you so much for your attendance, and have a good day.
So much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
And request for a meeting for finance and trade.